Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce's conversation on U.S., India, and China relations. In the post-COVID world, I think it's very safe to say that this is an extraordinarily relevant conversation, both from a geopolitical standpoint as well as a business standpoint, as companies evaluate their global supply chains and also just the state of affairs globally as we move into this new post-COVID order. We have very distinguished speakers joining us this morning for this conversation. We have Ambassador Verma, former US Ambassador to India. We have Ambassador Bambawale, former Indian ambassador, and we have Dhruva Jaishankar, who has been with a number of think tanks and policy institutes. Their formal introductions will be provided by Ashok Mago, founding chairman of the U.S.-India Chamber. Before we get started with today's program, I just want to welcome you on behalf of the U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce. We are a local chamber in the North Texas region. We support trade and business development here and support Indian American companies looking to do business in the North Texas area. We also support Indian companies looking to do business in Texas, as well as American companies looking to do business in India. We serve nearly 200 member companies, and we've been in the DFW region now for over 20 years. And it's a great honor to host you all for this very important conversation today. So I want to thank you for joining us. I also want to mention that this program is being recorded. A recording of this program will be available to you on the Chamber's YouTube channel. That channel is U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce, DFW. Also, a link to this program will be provided in the Chamber's newsletter, which goes out weekly. And you can also find all of our other programs that we've hosted through this COVID period in that newsletter as well. And so without further ado, I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. I hope you're staying safe. And I'd like to introduce and welcome Ashok Mago, founding chairman of the U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce, to introduce our speakers this morning. AK is a Padma Shri. It's one of the highest civilian honors the Indian government has bestowed on individuals. And he has been a champion of U.S.-India relations for many, many decades now. And we're grateful for his leadership in that area and thankful that he was able to join us this morning to introduce our speakers. AK?
Thank you, Neil. I'm delighted to introduce three friends today. Ambassadors Bambawale, Ambassador Verma, and Dhruva Jaishankar. Ambassador Bambawale joined the Indian Foreign Service in August 1984. He served in the Indian missions at Hong Kong and Beijing from 1985 to 1991. Upon his return to the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi, he served as first officer for China in the ministry. From 1993 to 94, Bambawale was director in the Americas division of the ministry. From 1994 to 1998, he was the director of Indian Cultural Center in Berlin, where he dealt with public diplomacy. From March 2001 to June 2002, he worked at the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi as the staff officer to the Foreign Secretary of India. Subsequently, he functioned at the Prime Minister's office in New Delhi as the Deputy Chief in the Division of National Security Affairs, Defense and International Policy. Ambassador Bambawale was head of the political wing at the Indian Embassy in Washington, D.C. from July 2004 to September 2007. During the India-US nuclear deal, this transformed ties between the two countries. From September 2007 to December 2009, he served as India's first consul general in Ganju from December 2009 to July 2014. He was the Joint Secretary, East Asia at the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi. He has served as the Indian ambassador to Bhutan from August 2014 to December 2015 and the High Commissioner of India to Pakistan from January 2016 to November 2017, and ambassador to China from November 2017 to November 2018. Ambassador Bambawale has dealt with China for 15 years of his 34-year diplomatic career. He is considered as an expert on China. Ambassador Bambawale is currently a distinguished professor, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Symbiosis International University, Pune. He is also a senior advisor at Ola. He's just like Uber and Lyft. Ambassador Richard Verma served as the US Ambassador to India from 2014 to 2017, where he is credited for historic deepening of bilateral ties, a leading expert on trade and diplomacy. In Asia, Ambassador Verma brings 25 years of experience across senior levels of business, law, diplomacy, and military. Nominated as US Ambassador to India by President Obama and unanimously confirmed by the Senate, Ambassador Verma oversaw one of the largest US diplomatic missions in the world, including 4 consulates with staff from nearly every agency in the US government. During his tenure, he championed historic progress in US-India relations with critical evaluations to bilateral cooperation in defense, trade, and clean energy. Ambassador also oversaw an unprecedented 9 meetings between President Obama and Prime Minister Modi, leading to over 100 new initiatives and more than 40 government-to-government dialogues. Ambassador Verma was previously the Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs, where he led the State Department's efforts on Capitol Hill. He worked as Senior National Security Advisor to the Senate Majority Leader and also spent time in the House of Representatives. He is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, where he served as on active duty as Judge Advocate. His military decorations include the Meritorious Service Medal and Air Force Commendation Medal. Ambassador Verma also brings to bear a distinguished career in the private sector. He was a partner in major global law firm for many years, and he also led the South Asia practice of a Washington-based consulting firm, where he helped clients navigate international trade and public policy frameworks across the Indo-Pacific region. He was also a National Security Fellow at the Center for American Progress and served as a member of the Weapons of Mass Destruction and Terrorism Commission, led by former Senators Graham and Talon. He is a co-author of their landmark report, World at Risk. Ambassador Verma is the Vice Chairman and partner at the Asia Group, where he is leading the firm's growth in South Asia. In addition to his role at the Asia Group, Ambassador Verma is a Centennial Fellow at Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service, where he supports the India Initiative, a signature program to advance research and teaching on India. Ambassador also co-chairs the Center for American Progress, US-India Task Force, with its chartering and actionable bilateral agenda to deepen US-India ties. Ambassador Verma is the recipient of the State Department's Distinguished Service Award, the Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs Fellowship, and was ranked by the India Abroad as one of the 50 most influential Indian Americans. Ambassador Verma holds degrees from Georgetown University Law Center, LLM, and American University's Washington College of Law, JD. Now, it's a pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's discussions. Dhruva Jaishankar is director of the US initiative at the New Delhi-based Observer Research Foundation. He is also a non-resident fellow with Lowy Institute in Australia and is a regular contributor to the media, presently writing a monthly column for the Hindustan Times. Jaishankar was previously a fellow in the Foreign Policy Studies at Brookings, India, the German Marshall Fund, and the Brookings Institution, as well as a television journalist. Jaishankar holds a master's degree from Georgetown University. His commentary has appeared in the Indian and international publications, including in print in the Indian Express, Politico, and the Times of India, and online for the Atlantic, the New York Times, the Washington Post. He has also been interviewed or cited by Bloomberg, The Economist, the Financial Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Now I will request Dhruva Jaishankar to start the program. Dhruva.
Thank you, Mr. Mago, and thank you for all of you to be here. It's good to see so many friends on this call. We're here to discuss a very timely and important subject, and we couldn't really ask for two better people with which to have this conversation. As most of you know, this year saw a major flare-up in India-China relations centered around the big boundary dispute between the two countries. And we've also seen a sharp deterioration in US-China relations, including in playing out in Texas, of course, with the closure of the Chinese consulate in Houston and the subsequent closure of the US consulate in Chengdu. And of course, this is also an important time for US-India relations as well. Perhaps one of the last trips, perhaps the last trip that President Trump made overseas was to India. And of course, we are in an election season where we're seeing cooperation not just on China, but also on coronavirus and other initiatives. So with this backdrop, I thought we'd start the conversation over the next 45 minutes. And I'd start off with Ambassador Bambawale, who has served several tenures in China and working on China in the Ministry of External Affairs in Delhi. This year we saw a major buildup of Chinese forces along the line of actual control, which is the disputed boundary between India and China. And while there was a disengagement process that started on June 6th, negotiated by military commanders from both sides, in the course of that process on June 15th, there was a major scuffle between Indian and Chinese troops that resulted in the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers and an unknown number of soldiers on the Chinese side as well. So, Ambassador Bambawale, could you start off for our audience, maybe telling a little bit as to what led to these developments until June 15th, and give some context as to the India-China boundary dispute and what we've seen there recently. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Let me start by saying what a pleasure it is to be with all of you this morning at your end in the United States and this evening here in India. On the boundary dispute and on what's been happening on the India-China border over the last few months, let me start by saying, as many of you already know, that there is no defined boundary between India and China. That means the boundary between India and China has not been settled. Even over the last 70 years after India became independent in 1947 and the People's Republic of China was established in 1949. We have been trying to find a boundary solution, a resolution, but it has evaded us so far. Now, as a result of this, both governments, especially in the last couple of decades, have realized that the possibility, the probability of Indian troops and Chinese troops coming into close proximity with each other and something, the situation spiraling out of control, the probability of such a thing is quite high. And therefore, over the last 25 years, in many intergovernmental agreements which were concluded between the two sides, India and China, the objective was to ensure the maintenance of peace and tranquility in the India-China border areas. So there were agreements signed in 93, 96, and so on, all the way down till as recently as 2013. Many of these agreements also state that the two sides will not increase the number of troops significantly in the border areas. Now, violating all these agreements in the summer of 2020, starting sometime in April, but definitely in early May, we realized that the Chinese PLA had moved many divisions of troops, so maybe about 3.5, 4 divisions of troops to the eastern part of Ladakh. And this itself was a violation of these agreements. But what happened afterwards was an even bigger violation of those agreements. Basically, what the Chinese were trying to do, the Chinese military, the Chinese PLA was trying to do, was to move its ground positions right up till points which it considered, with in its conception, were part of China. Now, remember that we do not agree to these kind of moves because of the fact that there is no agreement on where the boundary lies. So it violates the tenor and the principles of the agreements which have been signed. So what the Chinese were doing tactically was to try to take over actual control of ground situations, ground positions. I also think that what the Chinese were trying to do were to strategically inform and tell India that, look, there is a huge asymmetry in gross national power, in comprehensive national strength between the two countries, and that if they wanted to, they could actually define the boundary between India and China unilaterally, as they were showing on the ground. They were also trying to indicate that India should accept this pecking order in Asia, with China as, of course, the most preeminent power in Asia. Now, India's army, of course, has moved to stop the PLA. And in fact, it has, in many cases, stopped the PLA from achieving what its military goals and objectives were at the start of this summer period. In effect, what we're trying to tell the Chinese is that we will not accept you as a preeminent power in Asia or in the world. Therefore, I think what has happened is that in order to further reinforce this message, India has been taking policy measures, including the banning of 59 Chinese apps in the first step. There has been a subsequent ban on 47 more Chinese apps, which you can download on your mobile phones or on your laptops. And also recently, we have taken measures to ensure that public procurement in India by the government of India and Indian public sector companies will go through a process where we can weed out Chinese companies if we find that important and necessary. So I think to bring this argument to a close, India has signaled very strongly to China that we will not accept Chinese hegemony and Chinese bullying, neither on the ground nor strategically. And one of the things that this has made easier for India and the United States to do is to strengthen our partnerships. I don't want to go into the question, Dhruva, about why the Chinese have done this. Whatever the reasons, I think the actions speak louder than any words or any ideas about what they have done and why they have done it. And I think let me end and stop there to the first part of your questions. Thank you very much.
I was going to ask the follow-up because I think this has been one of the things that a lot of people have debated. What is the motivation behind this, particularly coming at this time when both economies are reeling from the coronavirus pandemic and when China is having a number of tensions with other countries as well, including the United States?
No, I personally think, and to quickly answer your question, Dhruva, sorry if I interrupted, but I think that it is a manifestation of China's aggressiveness all around. China is, I mean, the Communist Party of China is being aggressive domestically, internally within China itself for several years now. It's being very aggressive in the South China Sea, near the Senkaku Islands. There have been Chinese submarines there for now a period of well over 100 days. It's been aggressive in Hong Kong. It's been aggressive in the Taiwan Straits, and it's been aggressive on the India-China border area. So I believe this is an aggressiveness. I really don't know whether they thought that this was the right time to make these moves, but perhaps they did. But these are some of the possible reasons. I think Chinese motivations, whatever they are, what is more important is to see what are the actions on the ground and react to those actions, apart from motivations and words that China and others may use.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Verma, you were the United States ambassador to India at a critical period, which, amongst other things, saw the first visit by Prime Minister Modi to the United States, but also the President Obama's visit to India. How much, in your experience, both in that capacity, but also subsequently and before in other, how much did you feel that China featured in the U.S.-India partnership, in the U.S.-India relationship? How much was that a driver of the relationship?
Yeah, Dhruva, thank you. It's a really, I think it's an important question. I'll come to it in 1 second, but let me also first thank the Chamber of Commerce for inviting me. Not only today, but also a couple of years ago, I was able to come down to Dallas and at Ashok's invitation, and I'm really grateful for that and know the community there well. It's a terrific community. Also very happy to be with my fellow diplomat, Ambassador Bambawale, who I had the pleasure of working with. And in fact, we were last together in Bhutan when he did a remarkably skillful job there as ambassador. And Dhruva, there may be no better or more read leading foreign policy voice in U.S.-India relations or in Indian foreign policy. And it's an honor for Dhruva to be here. I have to say a word about Ashok just to embarrass him, because he is such a friend and such a partner. We are not members of the same political party, but I will tell you, when I was nominated to be ambassador, one of the first phone calls I received was from Ashok, who said that he had called both of the Texas senators to make sure there was no issue with my confirmation. I tell that story not only to demonstrate what a individual he is, and just what a great person he is, but also just a recognition that the relationship does transcend parties. The U.S.-India ties is so bipartisan, I would say nonpartisan. And so, Ashok, thank you for all that you've done in the relationship and for me personally. Let me kind of jump right in here. I don't think China has been a driver of our progress on U.S.-India ties. Now, that doesn't mean it hasn't been a significant country of interest. In fact, it has been for both nations. But I would really say that, objectively speaking, the U.S.-India relationship stands on its own. And it's really built on a number of pillars or foundational elements. And I think there are 4 pillars that the relationship is built on. The first one are the people-to-people ties. It is what brought my parents here in the early 60s. It is what brought Ashok and his family here. It is what makes up the Dallas-Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce and the 4 million Indian Americans that are working so hard to pull the two countries together. You can't underestimate how important the individual component is to this relationship. You know, great strategic thinkers like to think about all the foreign policy chess pieces on the board. I think we shouldn't underestimate that the underlying principle that keeps us together are our people. So that's pillar number 1. Pillar number 2 are the ideas and shared values that the two countries have. And it's not just a catchphrase. It's not just a clever thing to say we have shared values. The US and India have a different relationship. And there are at least 3 different sets of ideas that bind us together. The first are these ideas of our shared colonial experience and our need for social justice and racial justice and inclusion. If you look at the great scholars of the 19th century and how they influenced the great scholars in India and vice versa, you know, it is not an accident that Thoreau and Emerson were influential to Gandhi, who was influential to King. We honor John Lewis today and this week, who talks a lot about how he was influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. So we have this power in social justice. Second, we have the shared democratic principles. These are a powerful set of ideals. And you look at the scholars, again, your founder of the Constitution was influenced by American constitutional scholars. And I always say our 3, the 3 words that start both of our constitutions are the same in We the People. And the third set of ideas are peaceful resolution of disputes, the shared vision of the liberal democratic order. So there is a glue that holds us together. So we have our people, we have our ideas. Third, we have the third pillar is economics and trade. And on this score, we've done well, we can do better. We're at about $160 billion in two-way trade. Texas has been leading that effort in many ways. But one statistic always catches my mind about how much better we could do. In 1985, the two-way trade numbers between the US and India were about $5 billion. The two-way trade numbers between the US and China were about $5 to $7 billion. Think about where we are today. We're at 160 billion between the US and India. We are over 700 billion between the US and China. So we missed an opportunity to do more on the economics and trade, but it's such an important pillar and we need to build on it. And the fourth pillar between the US and India is the strategic pillar. And here we've come full circle. And here I think some history is important because we tend to talk about the last 20 years and how we've come together on the strategic issues in the last 20 years. I think it's important to go back, not to the period of Richard Nixon, but to the period of Dwight Eisenhower and to President Kennedy. I think we forget how committed in the second half of Eisenhower's term and all through Kennedy's term, Kennedy was and Eisenhower was to supporting India. And in fact, when Chinese troops were spilling across the border in 1962, it was President Kennedy that deployed thousands of tons of ammunition, logistical support, air support, intelligence support, in a way that I think surprises a lot of people when they go back and read that history today. And in many ways, the gains that we've made over the last, say, 10 years reclaim a lot of the ground that Eisenhower and Kennedy had set. So it's almost as if we went into this hibernation period for 3 decades and we've come back out of it. So look, it doesn't mean that China has not been important to this discussion. And I think about a decade ago, about 15 years ago, we looked out at a common set of threats and a common set of opportunities. Obviously, on the threat side, a rising and kind of expansionist China that doesn't play by the rules was certainly something we were looking at collectively. But we were also looking at the threat of terrorism, particularly after 9/11. We were looking at the threat of weapons of mass destruction, looking at the threat of climate change, migration, humanitarian disaster response, economic stability. So there is a lot that has brought us together on the threat side. And of course, on the opportunity side, that has also brought us together. We are excited about India of 2030, an India that will lead the world in almost every category. So my point, Dhruva, is that there's been a lot more that has brought us together. Yes, shared fears, yes, shared concerns, but also a lot of opportunities. Final thing I would say is that we are somewhat similarly situated when it comes to China. Set aside the dangerous neighborhood that India lives in and that 2,200-mile contested border that Ambassador Bambawale talked about, but neither India nor the United States seek a direct confrontation with China. We don't seek to control or contain China's peaceful rise. We are both significantly entangled with China economically. We both need to work with China where we can to solve common problems like climate, not non-proliferation. And there are significant disincentives to both Washington and New Delhi to engage in an actual conflict, a hot war with China. So we are preparing, and we continue to prepare for a downturn in the relations, but I think we both aim for peaceful and constructive relations with China. So with that, I'll stop there.
That's actually a good segue to Ambassador Bambawale. I asked you previously about looking back, but looking ahead, where do you see the India-China relationship going? You mentioned the app ban and public procurement, constraining public procurement in India from China. And just today, in fact, the Chinese ambassador to India gave a speech at the Institute for Chinese Studies in India, where he seemed to want to strike a more conciliatory tone. Do you think the India-China relationship will be able to bounce back from what we've experienced over the last few years? And what does that look like?
Thank you for that question, Dhruv. Let me go back to the boundary, because ever since December of 1988, when the then Prime Minister of India, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, visited China, and that was a gap of at least a couple of decades after which an Indian Prime Minister was visiting China, for all the reasons that all our listeners and viewers know. Ever since then, for almost the last 30 odd years, the India-China relationship has been structured around on the one hand, maintaining peace and tranquility in the border areas. And if that peace is maintained, then on the other hand, the rest of the relationship, whether it is the economics, the people-to-people exchanges, educational exchanges, tourism, etc., would move ahead. And that is exactly what has happened since 1988 all the way down till the summer of 2020. That largely the peace on the border was maintained, and the rest of the relationship, including the economics of the relationship, moved ahead. Just to give you a flavor of how India-China trade has risen over this period, at the turn of the century in the year 2000, India-China bilateral trade was roughly $3 billion US. In 2019, it was $90 billion US. So it has increased tremendously. Even though there is an asymmetry in trade, India, like the United States, is at the end of a huge deficit with China. But the point I come back to is that this was the kind of political contract, if you want to use that word, between the two countries. Maintain peace on the border, and the rest of the relationship moves ahead. Now, in the summer of 2020, what the Chinese have done is that they have broken and violated the peace on the border, especially given the large number of troops which I referred to at the start, which they have moved to the parts of Eastern Ladakh, which violates all the agreements between us on maintaining peace and tranquility on the border. So if peace is not maintained on the border, then on the other hand, the rest of the relationship cannot be what it was over the last 30 odd years. And India has started taking the initial steps, and I would call them initial steps, for changing the relationship, not only on the economic side, I mentioned a few things on the economic side, but also on the political and strategic side. The fact that Indian Navy ships operated in the Indian Ocean with the USS Nimitz a few days ago is one example of the strengthening of strategic and military ties between India and the United States. I think we are very likely to see the expansion of India's Malabar naval exercises, which already includes the United States and Japan, to also include Australia this year. So I think the rest of the relationship is going to be impacted negatively, unfortunately. And I think, the reason for that is the military action taken on the ground by the Chinese PLA. Now, as far as the military action is concerned, what India has been pushing for, of course, is not only disengagement between the troops and de-escalation, but also restoration of the status quo ante as it existed before early May of 2020. And only when Chinese troops do that will we take a look at the rest of the relationship. And the initial reactions of China are not good. Just today, the Ministry of External Affairs of India has put out a statement saying that the disengagement process has not really been completed between troops on the boundary, on the border, on the line of actual control between the two countries. And the de-escalation, of course, is the next step, which hasn't yet even begun. So it doesn't look very bright to me. But the point I'm trying to make is that if China has violated the understanding of maintaining peace on the boundary, on the border, then India must take steps to policy measures to ensure that the relationship doesn't continue to be as it is. And one final point that I'd like to make on this, Dhruv, is that if India did not take such policy decisions like banning the apps, and I believe that there is a ban on Chinese firms in India's 5G trials and rollout, which is also coming through the pipeline. I'm not sure of the timing of that, maybe in a few weeks or months. But if India did not take these measures, the Chinese would have gone away with the wrong message that India agrees to what has happened on the ground militarily, and India agrees to having China as a hegemon in Asia. And therefore, it is absolutely essential for the government of India to take all these measures. Let me stop there, Dhruva.
You touch upon an interesting point, which is and I think a number of the viewers also have questions around this as well. One area that has emerged as an area of cooperation between the United States and India over the last few months, first in the context of the coronavirus, but possibly accelerated by the tensions with China, has been cooperation by the US, India, and other countries on not just the COVID-19 response, but also supply chains. And talk, I mean, this is obviously going to be a long-term process, not an immediate set of policy measures. But how much, I mean, I think I'll maybe ask Ambassador Verma first, but I'd also like to get Ambassador Bambawale's views on this. How much do you see this context providing an opportunity, if you will, for US companies to move some of their supply chains to India, and what needs to be done, whether it's on the Indian side or on the US side, to help facilitate that process?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a big opportunity, actually. I think there was a survey done in China of American companies operating there about whether they were reconsidering diversifying their production out of China. Somewhere on the order of 60 to 65% of the companies said they were reconsidering whether China should be a base for their production and supply for their broader operations. And so I think there's a massive competition underway to capture that. But let's also be realistic. I think if you were to ask some of the White House trade and economic officials, including the president, he would say that we're not necessarily supporting diversification to other Asian markets. We are supporting reshoring back to the United States. And so I think there is a political dynamic that has to be worked through. But clearly a huge opportunity for India. And what the companies are looking for is obviously everything that the Prime Minister has been talking about for a while, which is improving the ease of doing business, the regulatory certainty, the infrastructure, the power supply, the customs duties, the legal environment. All of those issues continue to matter, and India continues to do a better job in each of those categories. But they are also now competing against Vietnam. They're competing against Thailand, Indonesia, and look, let's be real. There is real competition to bring those jobs back to the United States with efficiencies, with automation. A lot of the costs that drove companies overseas, those costs have come down, and there is a compelling case to bring a lot of that work back to the US. But I do think India can be a significant partner and beneficiary in that pathway as well.
On a similar note, Mr. Bambawale, one of the things that was a constant source of frustration for India was that, I recall 10 years ago, there was a lot more optimism from Indian companies about doing business in China. And over time, you could see frustrations build up over concerns about market access and so forth. And now, in some ways, it's all the reverse. In many areas where Indian firms were traditionally competitive, say in the tech sector, Chinese companies have now become quite globally competitive. How do you see the India-China business dynamic, business to business and commercial relationship changing?
No, I definitely see a reduction in India-China economic exchanges. And that is going to be a result of the policy actions or the policy changes that India is having to make to send a very clear signal to China that it cannot be business as usual if you keep, doing the aggressive moves that you do on the border. So that's one aspect of it. I think there's also a feeling that, there was far too much being purchased from China. And I'll give you just one example in the pharmaceutical industry, where India was dependent on imports from China of active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs as they're called, to the tune of 65 to 70%. And as all of you know, India's formulations are an important export product. So we used to import APIs in large quantities from China and then export the formulations, the finished products, etc. I think as a result of the changes which have been made and are being made right now, India will start manufacturing and producing much more and many more of these APIs in India because it is cost competitive. We just need to have the scale on which it has to be done. And this will be a net benefit for the rest of the world. I have read from a number of sources that already India's exports of APIs to the rest of the world have increased because no longer is cost the only defining decision-making or motivational factor, but where it's coming from, the reliability of that source of supply is also very important. And to come back to the larger point of India being able to attract FDI, not just from the United States, but from across the world, we realize that it's not as if companies across the world, international companies, are breaking down our doors to invest in India. So we realize that there's a lot to be done, as Ambassador Verma rightly said, in many, many areas. And I think that the current COVID crisis is something, in India, a crisis is always good for change. Even in 1991, the economic changes that were made and followed up later were all due to a foreign exchange crisis. So I'm hoping that the COVID crisis and the current economic downturn in most countries across the globe, including in India, will be utilized both by the government and by business to change the ease of doing business, to make it much easier for doing business in India, not only for foreign firms, but for Indian firms also. So I'm hopeful on that front. Our track record is not great, but I hope that with a decisive government in office and, of course, with the push from the COVID crisis, that India will be able to attract quite a few foreign investment, quite a few companies to invest in India. Let me stop there, Dhruva.
On a slightly different note, Ambassador Verma, this is an election season in the United States. Of course, all of this is happening amidst that backdrop as well. Let us say we have a change in November. There's the change in administration in the United States. You have Joe Biden as president after January. How do you anticipate? I mean, it's always fun to speculate about these things. How do you anticipate a Biden administration approaching China, but also the Asia as a whole, including not just the bilateral U.S.-India relationship, about which, as you mentioned, there is a strong bipartisan consensus. But what will be his approach to the relationship with China and Asia as a whole?
Yeah, thank you. I think that this is the kind of guessing game that everyone likes to play here in Washington. And let me just make the standard disclaimer: I don't speak on behalf of the campaign or Vice President Biden. But there's no question the competition with China will continue, and it will continue at a heightened pace. There's no doubt in that. It is a competition for primacy in global affairs. It is a competition for economic primacy, and certainly for primacy in Asia. And I don't think we will be able to prevail on our own as the United States acting independently. But working with friends and partners, I think we can try to get back to that concept of restoring this open, transparent, balanced, liberal democratic order that has kept the world relatively secure for the last 70 years. And so I think that contest about what type of world we live in will certainly continue. But I also think we are going to have to learn the lessons of the last 3.5 years. And if you were going to give China an express pass forward and leap ahead in what they were seeking to achieve, we've certainly done that. We've handed that golden ticket to them. So what is it that China wanted? First, it was a weakening of the US-led alliance system. You just have to look at the news of the last 24 hours of the president's berating of Germany, or demanding of almost $1 billion in payments from the Koreans. I mean, we have, I think it's an objective point to say we have greatly weakened our alliance system. China wanted us to cede the ground in international institutions. We have certainly done that. We have walked away from the Human Rights Council. We have walked away from the World Health Organization during a pandemic. We have walked away from the Paris Climate Agreement. We have walked away from the Iran Sanctions Accord. We have walked away from negotiations with North Korea. I could go on, but we've given China a free pass in the international institutions of the world. They wanted us to stop focusing on human rights abuses. We've certainly done that. Human rights values are not a part of our dialogue or discourse with China. The trade approach, the highly transactional trade war that we started, I think, again, any objective observer would say we have passed on the costs of that to American farmers and consumers. The Chinese have not fulfilled their promises under phase one, and they have certainly not opened up great sectors of their economy. Those costs in the increased tariffs have been passed on to Americans. While they have increased their foreign diplomatic and development personnel, we have cut back on our development and diplomatic personnel. While they have increased their investments in STEM and science and technology and education, we have cut back our investments on infrastructure, on STEM, on research. So look, if this is a competition and we are trying to prevail at all different levels, I think, again, not speaking for what a new Democratic administration would do, I think you'd have to look objectively at the last 3.5 years and say, has that been successful? And I think we have failed at so many fronts. So I believe, and again, I think the vice president has said this, that the investments would start here at home, and we'd have to regenerate American competitiveness, regenerate those alliances, and again, friends and partners. And I think top among those partners would be an enhanced and stronger U.S.-India relationship. And on that, I think the Vice President has a long and strong record on that front, some 40 years, and people can go back and look at it. It's a good record. So, from an Indian perspective, if you're in New Delhi, I'd feel quite good about if there was a change in administration.
Yeah. And Ambassador Bambawale, there have been a couple of questions from viewers, but I think we have an opportunity to elaborate a little bit upon this as well, which is what does the India-China military balance looks like? What are options that India has? So far, in some ways, the major retaliations, apart from, as you mentioned, stopping PLA aggression on the boundary, most of the retaliatory measures that India has taken have been on the economic side or but what does the military balance look like on the boundary? Where do you think future investments will be? And also in the maritime domain, I think actually one of the major initiatives under Ambassador Verma's tenure that the US and India did was the joint strategic vision for the Asia Pacific and Indian Ocean region between the US and India. Where does maritime cooperation come into this as well?
Yeah. Yes, Dhruv, that's an excellent question. Let me start with the military balance on the ground, that is the armies of the two sides, especially in the Himalayan regions of our border areas. There, if you compare what is the size of the PLA and the size, how many tanks, how many planes, what kind of planes, etc., with what India has, you will see that there is a big asymmetry between the Chinese PLA and the Indian armed forces. But if you look at it from the point of view of in that kind of terrain, which is in the high Himalayas at heights of 10, 12, and 12,000 feet and above, 15 and 16,000 feet, if you can see, if you look at what is the kind of men and material India can put up against China, you will see that there's a rough balance there. And therefore, India is very well positioned to protect herself, to protect our territory, and to defend our territory against the PLA. And I think very broadly, even though there are a few people in India who do not agree with this, very broadly, India has stopped the Chinese PLA from achieving all the objectives that it had when it started this summer campaign. On the larger picture, I think, as far as India is concerned, what the United States decides to do is entirely a thing for the people of the United States to decide on whether they go with the Republican candidate or the President Trump or with Vice President Biden. We'll be happy to work, and we are confident we can work with any one of them. Because as Ambassador Verma had rightly pointed out earlier, not only do we now have symmetry between the values that we share between India and the United States, but there is a sizable overlapping of interests too. And one of those interests is to strengthen our naval cooperation in the Indian Ocean, in the Indo-Pacific at large. And you can see that India is doing that. We are spending a lot more money on a new command in that part of India, in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And we hope to further strengthen our very strong defense ties, not just with the United States, but with other countries like Japan, Australia, perhaps even Indonesia, and maybe even Singapore, South Korea, Vietnam. So I don't know if I have answered your question, but from a military point, I think that's the direction in which India will move.
Sorry, I just had to get off mute there. Thank you. I think we are basically out of time. I'll turn it back to Mr. Mago and to Neil, but I very much enjoyed this conversation. I always learn something from conversations like this. And thank you both for a very enlightening and wide-ranging conversation that we had.
Thanks, Dhruva. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dhruva, and thank you, Ambassador Verma and Ambassador Bambawale. We really appreciate your extraordinary experience and insights, shedding light on this important conversation. At this time, I'd like to invite Raj Kalyandar, Chairman of the U.S. India Chamber of Commerce, to offer a few remarks before we close out this morning's session. Raj?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Neil. AK, did you have a few words you wanted to say to?
Well, I just want to thank both Ambassador Verma and Ambassador Bambawale. And as usual, I think Dhruv engaged them in different topics very well. And on personal note, want to thank Ambassador Verma for his nice words for me. He is someone that we all look up to. I think the Indian Americans in this country would love to participate at the levels he has, and the connections he has built between US and India. Thank you, Ambassador Verma. And Ambassador Bambawale, it's nice to see you after a long, long time. And I was hoping before your retirement, you will be India's ambassador to USA, but maybe they will appoint you now the Foreign Secretary of India. Thanks to everybody, and Raj, back to you.
Okay, thank you, AK. On behalf of our chamber, we want to again thank Ambassadors Verma and Bambawale for joining us, and thank you, Dhruv, for doing an excellent job of moderating. You've always been very insightful. I really enjoyed the conversation, and from the chats that we've been receiving in the background, many of our attendees have been engaged. So thank you all. We're very grateful for your insight and the growing trade opportunity. We hope everyone stays safe on behalf of the chamber, and we will talk to you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you to our friends in Houston for joining us as well. We're grateful for our partnership with the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Houston and our friends across the US. I believe we also have the US-India Business Council joining us today. So thank you all for joining us for this conversation. And we look forward to continuing this dialogue collectively in the days, weeks, and months to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.